Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Verbal to Visual podcast. I am your host, Doug Neal, and in today's episode, you're going to get to hear a coaching call between Monica Mejia and myself. Monica is in a very interesting position right now, adjusting to this global situation here where in-person gatherings just aren't possible. You'll get to hear about how Monica used her sketchnoting skills in pre-pandemic times, in her work as a psychologist, working with parents and colleagues and giving talks. And then we dig into this question of, okay, how might we create visual presentations, not for in-person gatherings, but now for online talks? Because there is an opportunity there to continue engaging in your work, sharing your expertise with others, and using sketchnotes as a way to share ideas more effectively in this online format. So I think you're really going to enjoy what we chat about. You can find the show notes for today's episode at verbaltovisual.com/4. Let's get into it. All right. Welcome, Monica. Thanks for joining us today. To kick things off, I will throw it to you just to give you a chance to introduce yourself and let the folks listening know where you're coming from and what you're up to with sketchnoting.
Well, hello, Doug. Thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to talk about sketchnoting, and this is the first time for me, so I'm pretty excited. I live in France. I am a psychologist, the mother of two girls, 10 and 5, and I'm originally from Colombia, where I grew up until I was 20. And right now I have been living in France for 20 years, more or less. So I work as a psychologist. I work with parents, with teachers in nurseries and in schools. And I work on visual thinking with them because I help them to figure out how to understand their job with children and the way they communicate. So I'm always looking for tools to get a better communication. And about 3 years ago, I encountered sketchnoting. And since then, I've fallen in love with this tool. I really love preparing my work and my meetings with these people based on sketchnoting, and I get to this point where I like what I see, I like what I do, and I very shyly try to share it with people. So this is one of these first steps on sharing with the world what I do.
Nice. That's exciting. It's fun to hear the work that you're doing, and for me, part of the fun thing about these conversations is like picturing the specific settings in which you're using your sketchnoting skills, because it's what's fun about that is that everyone, it's distinct for everyone, all of the specifics around the sketchnoting work that they're doing, but there are kind of commonalities across the board that makes it fun and I think valuable for other people, whether they're in a similar situation as you, kind of using sketchnoting largely as a communication tool, like in this work setting, or just as a personal learning tool. It's fun to see how different approaches and kind of specific skill sets can kind of transfer across those applications. Would you also, before I hit the record button, we kind of talked about what work looked like kind of before this worldwide pandemic hit us, and kind of we're in the middle of it now, so your work looks different. Would you mind kind of describing what it typically looks like, but then also what it's looking like now, and kind of some of the things you're doing to adjust, and how sketchnoting so far you're kind of dabbling with the role that sketchnoting might play there?
Yeah, of course. Actually, before the pandemic, I was working with parents in counseling. to help them figure out or understand the communication with children. So I used the visuals on the whiteboard to explain to them some psychological concepts or make things more easily learned or understood. And I used them, like I used a lot in sketchnoting for that on my counseling. I used to work as well with the teams in meetings, and when we were talking about a particular topic, I would take out my markers and my paper, and I would start making circles and squares
Hmm.
and putting them together, and I started seeing the reaction of people when we make this little things that are not very well drawn, but they managed to transmit what I was thinking, what I had in my head,
Hmm.
and that helped a lot to communicate with the teams. And they, it's like a mark that I have, and they always make fun of me because I arrive with my little bag full of markers and paper and post-it. So they're always very curious what I'm going to take out of my bag. And
Nice.
and on the talks that I used to give, sometimes for 20 people, sometimes for 150 people, to talk about child development or relationship with children. I used to use sketchnoting as a way to summarize what I've been trying to explain during the time of the talk. So people started telling me, "Oh, it's kind of funny how you draw this little brain. It makes it makes it fun and easily to understand neuroscience through your point of view with some drawings on the whiteboard or the paperboard or on the PowerPoint." So I started telling to myself, well, I should do it more often, and maybe I can share it. But
Hmm.
I very quickly understood that what you do with yourself, like to learn, to be concentrated, to retain more information, is not the same kind of sketch note that you transmit,
Hmm.
that you share. So I started paying attention to that. And when the pandemic came, from one day to the other, but we find ourselves locked in the house. There are no more talks, no more meetings with the teams, no more person to person counseling, but through the virtual space. So I started to adapt. So I discovered Zoom, and I discovered that I can connect my iPad to Zoom and make a whiteboard and sketch note through that. So people on the other side of the screen were as well sharing the thinking or what we were talking about, and it made me a bit closer to them,
Hmm.
less personal. So I started telling, well, maybe I this is a time that I can give to myself to improve more in the technique. Maybe I started reading things that touched me as person, and I started saying, well, this I should share, but I don't like the way it's presented, so I like to do a sketch note, and then I like to present it differently so I can share it with the people I know. And then I started sketchnoting and maybe sharing some things on Facebook or WhatsApp with my friends or with
Hmm.
people I work. And well, right now, talks are look. It looks like we won't be able to gather together. Well, at least here in France, not for at least 6 months or more. So it's going to be difficult to get back to talks. So I'm starting to look on developing maybe a different way of doing it, through visual conferences, visual talks, and so I'm going to try that out in the following weeks. So I've been looking how microphones work and how my telephone works as well. I've been discovering some functionalities that I didn't know my telephone or my iPad had. I've been watching your videos as well, which inspire me a lot to transmit learning through virtually. So that's about what I've been doing through this period, this very strange period that we're living in.
Yeah, it is. It is a weird time going on right now. And
Mm-hmm.
even, right before we hit the record button as well, you were experimenting with maybe the latest addition to your kind of tech setup. This document camera, like a camera that's kind of on this stand that can the stand is off to the side of your computer, but then it's got this arm with a built-in kind of webcam that points down and does a really great job of being able to share that screen of your desktop during
Mm-hmm.
something like a Zoom meeting. And that's where the limitation of this format of a podcast, I was like, dang it, that would be fun to be able to show what Monica's got going with that new dot cam. And there were a couple things that I found really interesting that I wanted to point out about the different applications before we're all in this shelter in place mode. The way you described the work that you do with different folks. So the first kind of applications of sketchnoting that you described were all collaborative, but each
Mm-hmm.
had kind of like a different angle on them. When working with parents in these counseling sessions, you mentioned how you were using visuals on the whiteboard to help communicate concepts and talk through whatever was going on. And that to me had this element of I'm guessing some of those visuals probably over time, to communicate a particular concept, you probably had those visuals ready to sketch out, but then it likely went in different directions depending on, what parents were going through or where the conversation went. So that's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
one style of using visuals to communicate, where maybe there's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of prep, or maybe a library that you pull from, but then it goes on from there. But then with using these tools in team meetings, it's kind of probably all on the fly. You're improvising as you go. You bring your bag with all the fun supplies that your colleagues get curious and hopefully excited about. So that's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
much more improvised way of visually tracking a conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
then the third, you mentioned using these tools within talks that you give, where it kind of leans to the side of being, fully prepped
Yeah.
prior to your talk. And I just found that to be interesting in that, in those different situations, there's a varying degree of the amount of prepped visuals and the amount that's kind of like improvised on the fly. And I think it's cool that each one of those three that we just described, it feels like it lives on a different place along that spectrum, which I hope, gets the listeners thinking about the different environments in which they're doing their work and just kind of pinpointing, oh, here are some places where maybe I can spend more time prepping a visual, and here's another time where, because of the improvised unknown nature of the conversation, here's an opportunity for me to do some of this on the fly and see how that goes to help kind of keep everybody on the same page. um, so I found that to be really interesting. And then now, I think it's obviously we're in a terrible situation globally, but for you to be using this time to build some new skills and respond to the new world of work that we're all in now, where our only option is to meet through the internet. But we do now, now compared to 15 years ago, 10 years ago, we've got all of these tools to be able to make those virtual meetings a lot more dynamic and hopefully more meaningful as well.
Mm.
So it's cool that you're leaning into the iPad and your document camera, and you're looking for ways to you know, bring at least some of that energy and that visualness that you were bringing to your in-person meetings, now bringing it into the virtual setting as well. So with that, I feel like that gives us a good picture of kind of what you're up to. What?
I want to add
Yeah, go
something,
ahead.
because you have named three ways of working with visual thinking, but I maybe forgot to name the really first one, because to be
Mm,
able to improvise in the teams with the
mm,
teams, I was doing it a long time alone for me. So to understand a book, to understand,
mm,
to follow a TED talk, or to resume something, and I started making little icons that talk to me. And when I listen to you making this whole description, I didn't see it like that, and I realized that I do have like a library on my mind of icons. And you made me think about something that I read from Beck, from the Idea Shapers.
mhm,
She says something about you don't have to be able to sketch on. You don't have to have a whole library full of thousands and thousands of icons. Sometimes 10 or 20, they just work fine. And I recall myself saying, how can you get to 20 icons? And I actually do. I do have
hmm,
10 or 20 icons that I use with everybody. Sometimes I say I'm repeating myself, but it's a new information for the person that I have in front of me. It's
mm,
known by me, but it's a new information for the other person. So this library of 10, 20 icons that I have on my head uh, suits fine to every single situation. So I improvise, but since I'm working on psychology and more or less the same subject, I find myself talking about the same stuff. Either I'm in a conference or on a talk, or counseling, or a meeting with somebody, or just on my own trying to study for myself. So I do use 10 or 20 icons, and that helps me a lot. So thank you for that, because that gives me a kind of confidence that I'm looking for.
Yeah, no,
Realizing that.
I'm really glad you brought that up. One, to give a shout out to Brandy Agerbeck. Her work is great.
Mhm.
I'll link to at least a few of her books within the show notes, but you mentioned the Idea Shapers as one of them. And
Mhm.
I think that piece of advice that you put into practice is so powerful, particularly for folks, early-ish on in their journey with sketchnoting, but getting to that place where there's 10 to 20 elements that you're comfortable drawing, that are in your visual vocabulary, that is such a powerful bank to pull from, that you might feel like isn't big enough, but particularly when working with other people,
Mhm.
having those to be able to weave into your conversations is such a powerful tool. And I think that getting to that place of confidence is that you can get there with that many visual elements. I hope that that's encouraging for folks that are just getting started, to get to that place themselves. And as you described, since folks tend to work within work with similar concepts, maybe with different conversations, with different people, different settings, but whatever your work is about, you're probably going to be talking about similar things. So
Mhm.
developing that 10 to 20 um, elements within your visual vocabulary that's connected to the topics that you most frequently explore. That's a great way to build confidence and know that you have that in your bag going in.
Mm,
So that's great. I really appreciate you bringing that in.
absolutely. Mm.
So from there, you shared a sketch note with me. Do you want to bring that in and talk about some specifics?
Yeah, I'd like to share that with you. This sketch note, I I have a I didn't send you the very first one. I've learned lots of things with this sketch note. I have to say, it was an article that I found very inspiring about positive parenting, and I read the article, and I said, well, this is very very helpful for my job. So I translated all the things, the ideas that were more interesting for me, and I translated it into French. So my first sketch note is in French, and I was trying to figure out how to put it on the paper. And that day, back then, my daughter was painting on a paper plate, paper dish. I don't know how do you say it. And she was doing painting, and she put it in the terrace outside. She put it on the floor, and it was so colorful. And I said, well, this is a great opportunity to take a picture with Procreate and start putting my ideas on this beautiful picture.
Hmm.
And I started translating, which meant already a job translating into
Hmm.
English from English to French. And I started putting on the picture that I took with directly with Procreate. And I did it. Then I didn't like the background, so I finished putting all the subject in it, the text in it, and I decided to erase some things. And I realized when I started to erase that I used the picture I took, and I messed it all up. I couldn't. I really messed the whole picture. It looked white, and I couldn't recuperate what the beautiful picture I took.
Hmm.
So that was a great opportunity to learn, because I said, well, okay, what can I do? Because the idea was nice, but I cannot use this picture anymore. So I took a layer, and I copied the picture, and I started drawing on top of the layer, with the same colors. So I tried to use the tools of Procreate. Thanks for that. And I got to make again what I wanted to keep from that picture that I took. And then on top of the picture, I started writing again, and I learned a lesson.
Hmm.
Never take a picture directly with Procreate.
Hmm.
Take it with your telephone and keep it on your photos, but don't use
I
it
see.
directly from Procreate. So that was a lesson I learned. So then I started to do it in Spanish, and I did the same thing. So I started copying and pasting, and that helped me improve some of my lessons I've been taking during this pandemic, on how to use Procreate. So that helped me to improve that. And when I saw your invitation for coaching, I said, well, this is a great moment to start translating in English. Why not? So I got back on English. And so I've done it in the three languages, and I was pretty happy, and I'm pretty happy to see the three tools. I just copied the image. I modified, I changed the text in the different languages, and that is going to help me as well for talk.
Hmm.
So this is the base of a talk that I'm going to give next week for parents who are going to be online with me, listening about positive parenting in French. So this is the story of this particular sketch note, and I like to keep all the trials that I make.
Hmm.
I can keep a track on the process, because I think one of the nice things of sketchnoting is that is to see the process and the way you get better. It's never perfect. You're always going to see things that you can improve, but it's the fact of saying, I did it. It's fine for me. I leave it just the way it is. And it's really, really something that keeps me, I don't know, it teaches me something every time I
Hmm.
sketch out. I realize that perfection is not, it's not necessary, and it really, really puts me in a very good mood when I see this whole process.
Hmm. Wow, there's so many things that I like about what you just described there. And to play off the most recent thing there, I think it's cool and it's great that you kind of keep the different iterations. You kind of track the process that got you to this finished sketch note, because I feel like there are kind of two things going on there. One is that you're experimenting with different sketchnoting elements and kind of like
Mhm.
building your sketchnoting skills in the process of doing that. But I've also found that in those iterations, you're also deepening your understanding of the concepts that you're sketching out as well. So it's almost like that's part of the learning experience that you're going through as you're figuring out, okay, what's a good structure for these ideas? What are some helpful
Mhm.
visuals?
Mhm.
And I think that even when that's messy, I feel like that's almost an integral and helpful part of the process too, of getting to this deep understanding of that set of ideas, is
Mhm.
those kind of iterations that you go through as you think through how to present and capture those ideas more visually. So I think that's great. I also think it's really cool how this particular sketch note, which I will share within the show notes for this episode, if you're comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Please
Awesome.
do. I'd like to
Um,
be, to have people talk about it, and really, I think comments, they also get you to improve.
mm,
So, and what I like of the sketchnoting community is that it's very respectful of what everybody is able to do. So there's not a look for perfection. This everybody's sharing, and what I like of this community is that uh, how do you say critical no,
mm,
constructive criticism is always present. People are very respectful, so that
yeah,
I appreciate, and I'm
I,
open if people
that's
like to talk about it.
that's great. That's a thing that I appreciate about the sketchnoting community as well. Um,
Mm,
and what I think was cool about this, like a thing that I still want to experiment more with myself, is the process that you described of using a photo as a starting point
mm,
for a sketch note. And it's a nice pro tip there for anyone using Procreate, not to take that photo within Procreate, but use your phone first and then pull it in from your Photos app, just to make sure it doesn't get lost in the process, or jumbled up maybe with with the tool. But what I like about that, and it sounds like this is precisely what you did, is that when you take a photo, it could be a kind of close up photo of like this paper plate that your daughter had painted on. It could also be, some sort of scene of a landscape or of a building or of a room or a wall. Like when
mm,
you can take a photo and then that gives you some of your visual structure as like a starting point. And, you can, whatever app you're using, you can play around with the kind of opacity of that image so that maybe you turn that opacity down so that it's easier to draw and write on top of it, so that you're not dealing with the full complexity of that photo. But that just feels like a really cool way to play with this real world versus digital world, like kind of blur those lines. And I can see how even though the final sketch note that we're looking at, there's no longer that photo background, I can see
No.
how it came from this painted paper plate. So I just think that's a really cool thing that other people might have fun playing around with as well.
I just sent you the first one with the paper plate, and you're gonna see the difference. It's really, you can see, actually, yeah, it's really cool what the tool allows you to do with the reality and the virtual world. And it's great to be able to trespass some limits.
Yes.
I'm not an artist. I'm a psychologist. I like colors. I like markers. I like, and what I like of Procreate is that you can use some tools as if you had all this panel of markers,
Hmm.
just with you. So yeah, I was just playing, and well, it came up. I'm pretty happy with how it came. And also, what I like to do when I finish is show it to somebody who doesn't know the subject, doesn't know very much, who is not a
Hmm.
professional on the subject. I like to give it. I usually give it to my husband, because he is next to me when I'm doing all this sketchnoting, and he's asking me questions, or at the end I give it to him so he can read it, not only that he can check on the grammar or things, but so he can tell me, do you understand what I meant, or does it make you feel, the icons, the colors. So it's a tool that we use as well in couple, to share something that we like. And actually, I managed to take him to a sketchnote camp last year, so he discovered why I love this community and this sketchnoting tool, and he started doing it, and he discovered himself in a different way. So it's pretty cool to share that as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad that
Mhm.
you're doing that, and I think that's a great step, like for particularly for folks like you who are using sketchnoting as a teaching or presentation tool. That showing it to someone who's not as familiar with the subject matter is a great way to just help identify things, areas for improvement as you're kind of talking through those concepts and the way they're depicted visually. And yeah, even the fact too that you can, you know, without having figured out the core visual structure of the page and all of the icons and the sketches, you've done that deep work. Then you can also like go in and translate it, like only erase the text in one language and then put it translate it into a different language. I feel like that's such a powerful way to kind of repurpose all of that work that you did in putting this together and make it valuable to more people, to kind of
Mm.
increase the impact, because there are three different languages that you're fluent in and working with. So I think that's a cool aspect of what you're doing as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Is
absolutely. I really enjoy it. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to hop in and ask, is there a particular thing that you wanted to talk through, or um, if you had a question around this sketch note that we've been looking at?
Um, my question always is, how can what should I improve? I don't know. I said just before that I'm not looking for perfection, but I still get the feeling that I need to improve on some things. But is it the lettering? I'm looking for the next step
Mm,
to
hmm.
um, to improve on this process. Maybe you get to see things that you can point out, or maybe by asking questions you can help me to think which could be the next level I could. Uh, I would love. I always say that when I grow up, I would like to be a graphic facilitator.
Nice.
I would love to, but in some way, I do it when I improve with my teams. But I don't feel as confident. I have the listening skills. I have this maybe the skills of being able to synthesize or summarize things that I'm drawing. Uh, but I don't know which should be my next level, and not for me to get lost on all the
Mm.
possibilities that
Yeah.
Sketchnote offers.
Right, right. Well, I do think you have a very strong foundation to work from, so I think you're doing great already. And as I'm looking at this sketch note here, just to kind
Mm,
of describe it a little bit for folks listening, again, do
mm,
go check out the show notes to see it.
mm,
In the center of the page is this more or less circular diagram with kind of these outer sections shaded in 6 different colors going around. I appreciate how that uh, gives some nice background and distinguishes between those different sections. And then
mhm,
you've got white text on top of the color for each of those.
mm,
And what I'm seeing too is the first couple of words. There's kind of like a title to each of those sections, which
mm.
you have used a little bit bolder of a font of text for,
Yeah.
um, which is helpful. I feel like you could even make those titles a little bit bolder,
Okay.
just to give a little bit more distinction, to help people kind of identify those different pieces of this overall sketch note. That might be
Mhm,
one thing to play with, is like most of the text here is more or less within the same size, right?
mm,
And there is a lot of text, which isn't necessarily a bad thing as you're
mm,
digging into these details, but maybe to help certain sections stand out a little bit, you could try increasing the size of your title font
mm,
for a few of those sections.
mm,
Um, that's one idea that comes to mind.
mm.
And
Maybe reducing the text as well. Maybe make it less, putting less text. That's.
yeah, that would be a thing to look for. I'm
Mm,
as I look at some of the as I read the specifics here, there might be some opportunities to make some phrases smaller,
mm,
because it is, to look at this whole image, to look at the completed image as I'm doing now, it does feel like there's like a lot on the page, and I'm not sure where to start.
okay.
What's great about using something like Procreate as a presentation tool is that when you're using this as like an anchor to a talk that you're giving,
Mm,
whether you're turning on like one layer at a time, or if you kind of like convert it to a PowerPoint or a keynote presentation,
mm,
you can introduce each of these ideas, each section of the sketch, one element at a time. And I think
mm,
what's cool about that from the viewer's perspective is that when they get to see how this full sketch came together from scratch, like they probably wouldn't feel overwhelmed at all by all of the things, because they got to see them come together, and
okay.
they heard you talk through each section of it, so they kind of have that context for this final image.
Mm.
So that would be, had you thought about that? I'm actually curious to hear how you plan to use this for the online talk that you're
I
giving.
I was planning actually, yeah, to use it on Keynote, because I find it
Cool.
easy to copy and paste when you're working with the Mac. So I was thinking some slides, maybe not to not taking the whole thing. Maybe I'll that is something that I can share at the end of the talk with the people who have participated to the talk. So actually, yeah, it's like to summarize what I've said. But I was thinking that I was going to put every color, only the words that are in bold, emotions, offer reassurance, limit media. So these things, I would take away the explanation, just
Mm,
these words. Maybe the center part would be a starting slide to explain
mm, yeah.
three types of stress and positive, tolerable, and toxic, and put it on a slide, maybe with some visuals instead of words, because
Mm,
I'm going to explain. And the things that are on the sides are things that are going to be on slides as well, but only the main words, only the keynotes, keywords, not the whole text. Those are things that I'm going to say. So at the end, that makes maybe a presentation of about 5 slides, something very short, but I can
nice.
talk about it for 1 hour, 1 hour and a half.
Right, right.
There's a lot of subjects I can on top. I can start wherever I want according to the questions I have from people.
Mm.
So it's kind of flexible. Yeah, I was thinking on a keynote with just 5, 6 slides, not more.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great approach to me. I like that you've kind of identified the pieces that you want to highlight within each of those slides, and that flexibility too, to be able to kind of respond dynamically to the questions or the comments that are coming up throughout, and
Mhm.
to not be like too tied to a very specific kind of progression, I think will be helpful.
Mhm.
And I think I do see some benefits of maybe cutting down some of the text a bit, just to have less words to have to follow on the screen. Since with this presentation format that you're describing, like your narration, what you are saying, is a part of the presentation. So that kind of gets at the distinction between thinking about the full context of the presentation. If you just wanted to like share the sketch note on Twitter or Instagram or whatever,
Mhm.
maybe just keep it how it is, because all of that more detailed text is helpful, because we don't have your voice to fill in the gaps. But when you are presenting it in like a live video chat, I think you can reduce the text that's on the screen or on your sketch, because you're providing that in your narration. Um,
It's
so I
it's
think that's
always
spot on.
it's always difficult for me to know where the boundary between too much and too little is.
Mm,
I thought about putting just the words, but it won't say much if I put it on Instagram or if I put it on the medias. So I'm always afraid of not
yeah.
having enough text, and maybe I exaggerate a little bit, maybe.
Well, here's a fun opportunity to do a little experiment with it. Um, I think what you just described as you were thinking about how you will present this during the live video chat, go with that approach of removing some of that detailed text, because
Mhm,
you'll be providing that in narration.
mhm,
But then at the end, kind of offer two versions of your final sketchnote summary.
mhm,
One version is, pretty much just the visuals that you showed throughout the live presentation. So kind of the like stripped down version of it with less text. And then the
Mm-hmm.
second version is the more full one that we're looking at right now. And
Mm-hmm.
then just ask like ask your audience like which of these two is more helpful for you right now, having just gone through like the presentation and the exploration that we did, and let their feedback guide the next time you give a talk like this. That could
That's
be kind
good.
of a fun way to go about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good idea. I can give it a try to ask feedback. It's not it's a real exercise. You have to be really ready to
Right. If you open the doors for feedback,
Oh
you're ready
yeah.
for anything to come in.
Yeah, yeah. But it's that is what it helps to that's what
Yeah, and I
helps
think it
to
we're
grow.
yeah. And my sense in chatting with people who are starting to weave these types of visual elements into presentations, it's still it's not a common enough thing yet, so that people audiences tend to be very thankful that you're putting in this effort on their behalf. So in the same way that we talked about the sketchnoting community being supportive and providing constructive criticism. My sense is that for the most part, the general audience, they're also going to be thankful that you're taking the time to create these visual takeaways. So my hope is that comes through in the feedback, even if there are some specific improvements or not so constructive feedback that occasionally comes through. But I expect that to be pretty rare.
Yeah, I expect to as well. Yeah, I think people are very happy to. They're not expecting it
Right.
at the end of the talk to have something sympathizing that summarizes the talk. They don't expect it. So maybe it can be a good way of taking something else than just the tools and the experience of being of having participated on the talk is taking something home. And well,
Mm,
you you see it a couple of days, a couple of weeks later, and maybe you realize that you still remember what you've heard, and maybe for some people it can be surprising, and maybe a way of entering in this sketchnoting, because I that's what I like, is the way that it helps to recall things after months, after years. I
mm,
see my first sketch notes, and I'm always surprised to see how the information comes back just by seeing something that a visual. So
absolutely.
maybe
Out of curiosity, Monica, when are you giving the talk connected to this sketch note?
on Tuesday. It's
Okay, coming up
Tuesday
a
on the
week from
5th.
today.
Yeah, a week from today. So I have to work on the presentation. And maybe if you want, I can send. It's going to be in French, but I can send you the keynote so you see how it came.
Yeah, no, I would love to
Yeah,
see it.
I
I'd also,
can.
if you get a chance too, I'd love to hear how it goes after the fact. So
Ah,
if you feel like sharing, maybe just within the classroom environment, giving us an update, and yeah, even if you actually wanted to share your visuals there too, I'm sure other folks within Verbal to Visual would love to see that. But also just a sentence or two recap of how the experience went.
right.
That depending on the timing of when this goes live, I might be able to uh, add a little bit of a how it went description to the end of this podcast before it goes live. I think that would be
Oh,
fun.
okay. I would love to. I'd love to share the experience. I can tell you after Tuesday how it went.
All right. Well, that sounds
It will be
great.
my pleasure.
Any do you feel like this conversation gave you some things to work with and some takeaways for moving forward?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah, yeah. It helps me a lot, with the idea of uh, making this presentation, and maybe the exercise of giving it away and asking people about the two options, how they prefer, what would they add to one, or what would they take up from the other. Maybe that helps me to get some feedback, because I think I have to improve a little bit on the synthesizing part,
Hmm.
and maybe turning some words into visuals.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe take those risks, a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That could
yeah.
be another fun thing to experiment here
Mm,
with, whether you wanted to do it with this presentation or with the future one,
mm-hmm,
um, within those primary sections, those six components. Since right
mm,
now it's those are all text, you've got like the variation of the title and kind of the details.
mm-hmm.
Maybe try to add a little sketched scene for each of those as well, if you wanted to bring some more visualness to it.
Okay.
Um, just another, not to put not to put more things on your plate, but just that is more along the lines of like things you might experiment with in the future. Because I
Mm.
think you've already got a great visual tool here that folks are going to appreciate.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Great.
Well,
Well, thanks for chatting. I think we'll wrap up for today. But man, you got a lot of cool things going on, Monica, and I'm excited for you in the way that you're already incorporating sketchnoting into your work, both what you've been doing in person and now what you're doing online. So just keep it up. You're doing awesome already. So keep
oh,
plugging away at
thank
it.
you so much for that feedback. That boosts me. That gives me a lot of energy.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, and looking forward to hearing how things go as you keep exploring too. So do
Thank you
stay in
for
touch.
your sharing and your generosity, Doug. It's very, very nice to be able to talk about these things with people like you, so open and so generous with their knowledge. So thank you very
Mm,
much.
my pleasure. These are fun conversations for me too. So thanks for joining, and
Thank you.
have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, you too, and take care.
I hope that you enjoyed that conversation between Monica and I, and that our chat about making helpful visual anchors for an online talk gave you some ideas. And I encourage you to ask yourself, do you have an opportunity to add some visuals to a current work project that you're sharing with others? And what experiment might you take on? To dig deeper into the development of your sketchnoting skills and to share your work and get feedback within a safe space of fellow sketchnoters, come check out Verbal to Visual's online learning platform. We've got some standalone sketchnoting courses that you can work through at your own pace, and we've also got a community where you can engage in weekly prompts and monthly masterminds to help you work toward mastering this skill and applying it to your professional or personal life in meaningful ways. Anyone who signs up for a course or joins that community gets access to these coaching calls at no additional cost. So I would love to chat with you and share our conversation in a future podcast episode if you're willing. There's no requirement that we publish them, so don't worry about that. You can find information about those resources at verbaltovisual.com, and then just add a /4 if you'd like to see some show notes for today's episode. And if you've been enjoying these first episodes, this is the fourth that I'm putting out during this launch period, I encourage you to rate and review this show on your podcasting app of choice. That would mean a lot to me personally, and it will also help other visual thinkers find this show and learn from the people like Monica that come on to ask good questions and tell their story with sketchnoting, because as you've probably experienced, it's pretty inspiring to hear what other folks are up to, what they're doing with their sketchnoting skills, to go a little bit deeper with their work and share that work with others in a potentially more meaningful and impactful way. So do consider that rating and review to help spread the word, and keep an eye out for new episodes coming each Tuesday. We're going to settle into a 1 new episode per week schedule here, and I'm excited to share all of those future conversations with you as well. So do stick around. Thanks so much for listening, and we will talk again soon. Till next time.